Welcome to the Sleeping Hourglass. Tonight, we travel to 15th century France, a weary land stitched with battlefields and hope held together by prayer. This is the story of a young girl who listened closely to the silence and believed heaven was speaking back. It's a story of faith and courage. If these stories bring you peace, you're always welcome to support the channel with a quiet like or a gentle subscribe, only if it feels right. Morning settles gently across Domrémy, as though the sky has lowered its forehead to rest against the earth. Mist floats over the meadows in soft, unbroken sheets, catching the pale light of dawn and holding it like a secret. The Marne River moves with a quiet, almost meditative patience, its surface silvered by the waking sun. And in this tender hush of rural France, long before the weight of destiny gathers, a young girl walks barefoot across the damp grass. Joan is small, her steps careful, her breath visible in the cool spring air. She carries herself with a serenity uncommon for her age, a serenity shaped not by complacency, but by a deep attentiveness to the world around her. The sheep move ahead of her in a gentle cluster, bells chiming softly, as though even they feel the need to tread lightly through the morning calm. Domrémy is not large. A scattering of homes, wooden and modest, nest along the curve of the river, their chimneys beginning to whisper thin trails of smoke as hearth fires are rekindled. The village wakes slowly, like an elderly hand flexing its fingers in the cold. Yet even as daily chores begin, buckets lifted, doors opened, bread kneaded, there is an unmistakable sense of stillness here, a soft, lingering peace. Life in this place is simple, almost monastic. Fields, prayer, seasons, the rhythm of harvest and winter, sowing and waiting. But beneath this simplicity lies an unspoken tension, an awareness that the world beyond Domrémy is not so gentle. The 100 Years' War has dragged its shadow across the land for as long as anyone can remember. Stories drift into the village like stray leaves, towns burned, armies marching, borders shifting. Yet here, in these quiet fields, the storm feels far away. For now, Joan pauses beneath an ancient beech tree, its roots pushing up through the soil like the knuckles of an old storyteller. She lays a hand against the trunk, the bark cool beneath her fingers. She likes to rest here, where the world feels steady, anchored, safe. A place where thoughts gather themselves without hurry. She thinks often of God, not with fear but with familiarity, as one might think of a friend who always knows where she is. Her prayers are simple, for her family's safety, for the well-being of the village, for peace. A peace she has never truly known but imagines the way a child imagines snow before ever seeing it. Her faith is not dramatic. It is quiet, woven into the way she lifts her face to the sunlight or hums under her breath while mending cloth. Yet even in this simplicity, there is strength, a kind that grows slowly, like a tree preparing itself for storms it cannot yet foresee. A wind moves across the meadow, bending the tall grasses. Joan watches the motion, her eyes narrowing slightly as though reading a message written in the air. She is only a girl, but she carries a sense of inwardness, of listening. The people of Domrémy see it sometimes in the way she tilts her head, as if hearing something faint and far away. They think her dreamy, perhaps a little strange, but harmless. Just a child with a thoughtful soul. The sheep drift toward a patch of clover. Joan follows, letting her fingertips skim the tops of the wildflowers. She feels the pulse of the land beneath her feet, the way one might feel the steady heartbeat of a sleeping animal. There is something comforting in this, something grounding. From the village, the church bell begins to toll, slow, steady, calling the faithful to morning prayer. The sound carries across the fields, brushing against the mist. Joan closes her eyes for a moment, letting the vibration settle into her chest. She loves the church bell. To her, it is like a gentle hand placed on the shoulder, a reminder that she is seen, held within something larger than the small boundaries of Domrémy. She gathers the flock and begins guiding them back toward the village path. As she walks, the fog thins, revealing patches of bright green where the sunlight breaks through. Birds stir in the hedges. A dog barks somewhere in the distance. The world awakens slowly, peeling back its layers of sleep. Joan's thoughts drift to her mother, Isabelle, who will already be kneading dough, her hands dusted with flour. Her father, Jacques, will be checking the fences, tending to the small responsibilities that anchor their days. Joan loves her family with a quiet, steady devotion, one rooted in gratitude rather than expectation. They are not rich, but they are warm. Their lives are full of labor, but also of a kind of everyday sanctity that Joan treasures. As she approaches the village, a pair of children run past her, laughing, their breath puffing out in clouds. They wave to her, calling her name. She smiles, lifting a hand in return. Even their laughter feels softened by the morning light, as though sound itself is reluctant to disturb the serenity of the hour. But beyond that laughter, beyond the calm and the mist, lies something else, a tension barely perceptible, like the faint tremor before a bell rings. Joan cannot name it. She is too young to understand premonition, too gentle to recognize the early tremors of destiny. Yet something in her senses the shift, a subtle stirring in the soul, the way the air changes before rain. For now, though, she walks on, collecting moments of peace like small stones in her pocket, unaware of how precious they will one day become. The sheep bleat as they enter the village gate. Joan hushes them softly, patting one on the neck. Her mind drifts once more to prayer, to whispers of hope and the longing for calm in a fractured world. Something deeper than childhood innocence stirs within her. A readiness, though she does not yet know for what. The bell gives one final, resonant toll. Joan lifts her head. Something in the air feels different, a quiet waiting. Summer settles on Domrémy like a blessing. The air carries the scent of warm earth and crushed clover, and a soft golden haze clings to the edges of every leaf, every stone, every ripple of the river. On this afternoon, the fields lie open and sunlit, and Joan walks through them with the unhurried steps of someone who believes she has all the years in the world to wander. She is older now, not quite a child, not yet grown, caught in that tender space where innocence lingers, but awareness begins to unfurl. The sky above her is wide and unmarred, the kind of blue that feels almost holy, as though heaven has lowered itself close. The sheep graze nearby, bells chiming softly. Joan kneels to tie a broken stem of wildflower into her hair, humming beneath her breath. The world is quiet in that warm, shimmering way that summer afternoons often are, a quiet so deep it feels like a held breath. And then, without warning, the silence changes. At first, it is not a sound, it is a sensation, a brightness, a presence, as though sunlight has gathered itself into a single point and begun to awaken. Joan straightens slowly, brushing dust from her palms. She turns her head, expecting perhaps to see a villager approaching or a dog bounding through the meadow. But the field remains empty and the air remains still. Then the light intensifies. It filters between the trees with a clarity sharper than natural sun, a brilliance that feels alive. Joan's breath catches, her heart stutters, then begins to beat with a fierce, bewildered rhythm. Something moves within the brightness, not a shape exactly, but a sense of form, of intention. And then she hears it, a voice, not loud, not forceful, but bright like the first strike of a bell, so pure it seems to ring through her bones rather than her ears. She cannot understand how she knows it, but she does. This is not a voice born of earth. Joan, her name, spoken gently, yet carrying weight she cannot define. Fear does not rise in her, or does. Deep, trembling awe that roots her feet to the ground. She is not a girl accustomed to visions, not one who imagines wonders for the sake of dreaming. Her faith has always been quiet, steady, and practical. But this is something that breaks open the ordinary world and lets light spill through. Out of the radiance steps a figure, not fully flesh, not entirely spirit, but something in between, something more. Wings like shards of dawn stretch behind him, and his presence carries the surety of a warrior who has stood at the threshold of eternity. Saint Michael. She knows it the way she knows her own heartbeat. His gaze is steady, protective, as though he has watched her far longer than she has lived. Joan falls to her knees. The grass brushes her palms, warm from the sun, but her body feels cold with wonder. Tears prick her eyes, not from sorrow, from the profound confusion of standing before something too beautiful and too immense to hold. "Be good, Joan," the voice says, bright as a sword reflecting the sun. "Be brave. God has plans for you." The words strike something inside her, not understanding, not yet, but a faint, shimmering doorway opening somewhere deep in the soul. She bows her head, unable to speak. The air around her quivers with suppressed power, like the moment before lightning touches the earth. She thinks of her father's fields, her mother's prayers, the quiet life she has known. None of it prepares her for this moment, yet all of it, somehow, has led her to it. "You will be guided," Saint Michael continues. "Heaven watches over you." The brightness shifts, softens. Joan dares to lift her gaze, and the world seems suspended, held still by this sacred encounter. But even as she looks, the radiance begins to fade. The figure dissolves gently into the light, as though retreating behind a veil. "Wait," John whispers, her voice breaking. "Please." But the vision is already dimming. The world returns gradually, the rustle of leaves, the heat of sunlight, the distant bleating of sheep. It feels too ordinary now, too unchanged. And yet everything inside her has shifted. Her breath shudders as she rises slowly to her feet. Her legs shake, but she is not afraid. She presses a hand to her chest as though to steady the echo of a voice still reverberating within her. She looks around the grove, searching for any trace of the impossible moment, but the meadow stands innocent, unchanged, as though it has kept her secret. Joan closes her eyes. A part of her longs to tell someone, her mother, her brother, the priest. But another part, deeper and wiser, knows this is not a story to be shared casually. This is a seed placed quietly into her life, meant to grow in silence before it breaks into the world. She feels different now, fuller, as though a new breath has entered her lungs. The earth seems closer, the sky sharper, the air alive with hidden meaning. She gathers the sheep, guiding them back toward Domrémy with slow, thoughtful steps. Her hands still tremble. The vision has left her with more questions than answers, but she senses one truth with absolute clarity. The world she has known is no longer the whole story. Something vast has touched the edges of her life, and nothing will ever be quite the same. As the sun dips toward evening, Joan pauses at the crest of a small hill and looks back at the grove. The light rests on it gently, as though guarding the memory of what she has seen. She presses her fingers to her heart once more. A voice has called her, and she has heard it. The days after Joan's first vision unfold like pages turned in a book she is suddenly able to read. Each sunrise glows differently now. As though dawn itself carries a hidden message, she moves through her chores with the same hands, the same footsteps, yet everything feels tilted, quietly altered. The world no longer stands simply as it is, it stands as something waiting. She tries to hold it inside. The memory of the bright voice, the brilliance that shook her bones. But silence becomes a fragile vessel. The vision presses gently but insistently at the edges of her days, a reminder that the ordinary world has split to reveal something luminous beneath. She tells no one. Not yet. How could she explain what she barely understands? Instead, she prays. In the small church of Domrémy, she kneels in the half-light that spills through coloured glass and moves like water across the stone floor. The candles flicker with soft, wavering breaths, and Joan's whisper slips into the stillness. "If I am meant to hear more," she murmurs, "let it be clear." The prayer rises, simple and honest, and heaven listens. For a time, life continues with deceptive calm. She tends sheep, she gathers water, she helps her mother mend clothing and bake bread. But something inside her waits, a stillness filled with expectancy, like a door left ajar. Then, one afternoon, the world opens again. It happens near the edge of the garden, where lavender leans in purple clusters and bees drift lazily between blossoms. Joan stands alone, hands dusted with earth, when the air around her sharpens, not with violence, but with a clarity that pulls her into a deeper quiet. The light gathers, not the sudden blaze of St. Michael's arrival, but a gentler radiance, like moonlight turned warm. Joan's breath hitches. She lowers her head, heart pounding, as two figures begin to form beside the wavering fragrance of lavender. They do not step out of the light so much as emerge from within it, taking shape the way dawn forms over the hills. Soft, gradual, inevitable. St. Catherine, St. Margaret. Their presence carries a peace so profound that Joan feels her knees weaken. She sinks slowly to the ground, hands clasped, her heart fluttering like wings trapped inside her chest. "Joan," one of them says, her voice tender as a mother waking a child, "do not be afraid." The words fall over her like cool water on fevered skin, yet awe still shakes her. She bows her head deeper, overwhelmed by the nearness of holiness. "We come to guide you," the other saint continues. Her tone is calm, but threaded with something firmer, the steady pulse of purpose. France suffers. Her people lose hope. A tremor runs through Joan. She knows this. Everyone knows it. Talk of war threads through every market, every harvest gathering, every whispered prayer for sons who do not return. The land feels bruised, aching. But what does this have to do with her? "You, Joan," says St. Catherine gently, "are chosen." The words feel too large, too heavy. Joan lifts her gaze, tears already rising. "I am only a girl," she whispers. "I do not know how to help anyone." St. Margaret steps forward, her face radiant with a gentleness that can hold sorrow without breaking. "God chooses not by strength but by willingness, and your heart, Joan, has always been open." The vision shimmers around her, warmth, light, the soft hum of something divine threading through the air. Joan closes her eyes for a moment, swallowing hard. "What would you have me do?" There is a long, tender silence before the answer comes. "You must go to France's aid. You must lift the siege upon her. Bring hope where despair has settled like winter frost." St. Catherine's words curl through the air like silk, beautiful and terrifying. Joan's breath falters. Lift France? She is a girl who tends sheep, who needs bread, who knows the rhythm of Domrémy seasons but not the language of war. The task is beyond imagining. She is quiet for a long time. Then, softly, she speaks what she fears. "I cannot do such things. I have no power." "You have obedience," St. Margaret replies. "You have purity of intention, and heaven will guide you." The words settle in her like seeds buried deep. The vision lingers for several breaths more, long enough for Joan to feel its warmth, to understand that this calling is not a single moment but a path unfolding beneath her feet. Then, slowly, the saints fade, like sunlight dissolving into dusk. The garden is quiet again, but the quiet is different now, charged, expectant. Joan sits on the ground for a long while, her palms pressed into the earth, her face damp with tears she does not wipe away. Her mind feels torn between two worlds. The one she has known, filled with fields and familiar faces, and the one whose edges are beginning to glow with possibility. A great task has been placed before her, and the enormity of it presses against her chest until she trembles. Yet beneath the trembling she senses something steady. A certainty, a rising flame that is no longer content to be small. The visions return over the following days, each one clearer, stronger. Saint Catherine's voice soothes her doubts. Saint Margaret steadies her resolve. And sometimes, faint but unforgettable, Joan feels the protective presence of Saint Michael like a sword gleaming faintly at the edge of her life. The message grows the way a river grows from spring rain, gathering strength, direction, inevitability. France needs you. You must go. The more Joan hears it, the more the words weave themselves into her heart. They frighten her. They humble her. But they also ignite something fierce within her, courage she did not know she possessed. One night, unable to sleep, she steps outside. The village is hushed, the stars bright and countless above her. She stands in the middle of the quiet lane, hands wrapped around herself, and whispers into the darkness, "If this is truly your will, help me be strong." A breeze stirs, soft and warm, brushing her face like the touch of a hand. She closes her eyes. The quiet fields of Domrémy, once her whole world, now feel like the edge of a vast and mysterious beginning. Childhood is loosening its embrace, and destiny, patient but insistent, presses gently at her back. When she finally returns indoors, she knows with unshakable clarity that she cannot remain here forever. The calling has taken root. It will not let her go. Morning arrives softly over Domrémy, brushing the thatched rooftops with pale gold, as if reluctant to disturb what is about to unfold. The air carries the scent of wet grass and hearth smoke, familiar, comforting, almost enough to anchor Joan where she stands. But the voices have grown clearer. The certainty inside her, once a flicker, now burns with a steady flame. And on this quiet morning, she understands that remaining would be a deeper disobedience than leaving. Still, the knowledge does little to ease the ache of farewell. Joan lingers at the doorway of her home, fingers tracing the edge of the wooden frame worn smooth by years of weather and hands. This threshold has held every season of her life. Laughter from her brothers, the clatter of chores, the rhythm of prayers whispered at dusk. Beyond it lies the only world she has known, a world that shaped her innocence and sheltered her calling. To step past it now feels like stepping off the familiar earth and onto something vast and trembling. Her mother watches her with eyes that already glisten, though she tries to mask the fear beneath a mother's final blessings. It is not that she doubts God, but that she knows how the world greets young girls who speak of visions and destinies. Her father stands nearby, sturdy as an oak, yet silent, as if words will betray a vulnerability he refuses to show. John wants to reassure them. She wants to say she will return soon, that God would not lead her into harm. But she cannot offer promises she does not fully understand. She can only trust the pull inside her, the one that refuses to let her remain still. A chilly breeze sweeps through the village path as Joan steps forward, carrying the small provisions her family offers: bread, dried apples, a cloak thick enough to guard against winter winds. She wears no armor, carries no weapon, only a faith that feels heavier and more binding than iron. It is strange, she thinks, how something invisible can weigh so much. The fields surrounding Domrémy stretch outward in quiet layers of frost-tipped green. They have always been companions to her, places where she played as a girl, where she first heard the heavenly voices that reshaped her life. Today, they seem to bow gently as she passes, whispering their own muted farewell. The old sycamore near the meadow stands solemnly, branches bare, like a witness to her leaving. She resists the urge to touch its rough bark one last time. Some goodbyes are too tender to bear. Her footsteps settle onto the narrow road leading north. With each one, childhood loosens its hold. There is no dramatic break, no sudden severing. Only a gradual widening of distance until the familiar world becomes a memory softened by the morning mist. As she walks, doubt moves quietly beside her, shadow-like, What if the voices mislead her? What if she is mistaken? What if Vaucouleurs rejects her? The questions are thorns on the path, but she does not turn back. Doubt can walk with her, but it cannot guide her. Determination, bright and unwavering, holds the lantern. The road to Vaucouleurs winds through small hamlets and fields where winter wheat stirs faintly under the soil. Travellers glance at her now and then, a young girl walking alone, purposeful, unafraid. They cannot know that the fate of a kingdom breathes in her steps. They see only a peasant daughter with steadfast eyes and a cloak too thin for the wind. By afternoon, she reaches the forestage where tall pines whisper secrets to the sky. In this quiet shade, she rests, pulling her cloak tighter as a cold gust sweeps down the hillside. Here, her thoughts settle like fallen leaves, layering the ground of her mind. She thinks of her home, of her mother's trembling hands, of the way her father looked away to hide his fear. She thinks of her village church bell, steady and familiar. She carries these memories like talismans in her heart. But she also thinks of France, battered, fractured, losing hope with each passing season. She thinks of the Dauphin, uncertain and beleaguered. And she thinks of the message she must deliver, the mission she must begin. These thoughts push her onward, granting her strength where rest cannot. When she resumes walking, the sky shifts from pale gold to muted silver, hinting at the early descent of winter dusk. She pulls her cloak close, breath rising in small clouds. The cold makes her steps slower, but not less certain. Every mile reminds her that she is moving toward the first true test of her calling, convincing men in authority to believe a girl scarcely old enough to be trusted alone on such a road. By the time the walls of Vaucouleurs appear as faint silhouettes, the light has dimmed to the color of fading embers. The town sits firm against the hills, its stone battlements outlined by the glow of torches. The sight fills Joan with a peculiar mixture of awe and resolve. This is no simple village. This is a doorway into the wider world, into the realm of soldiers and commanders, strategy and doubt. A place where her voice must rise with the clarity of truth or be dismissed as folly. As she draws closer, she hears the distant clang of metal, the murmur of voices, the steady pulse of a town weary from war but still standing. These sounds are foreign, almost overwhelming, yet they awaken something within her, a sense that she has stepped into the current of history itself, a current she has been called to follow. She pauses just before the gate, allowing herself one last breath of the life she leaves behind. Then she steps forward, carrying the quiet courage that has grown in her since the first moment the voices spoke. She is ready, not because she feels strong, but because purpose has chosen her, and she cannot deny it. For the first time, she understands that leaving home is not an abandonment of what she loves. It is an offering, a stepping into the unknown so that others may one day return to safety, a sacrifice made by a girl whose heart belongs to something larger than herself. Ahead, Vaucouleurs waits. The morning light over Vaucouleurs carries the hue of tempered steel, cold, durable, indifferent. Joan steps beneath it with quiet determination, her breath forming small clouds as she approaches the gate. The guards watch her with mild curiosity as travellers and petitioners pass through daily. Yet something in her posture, in the unflinching clarity of her gaze, draws their attention in a way they cannot name. She asks politely to be taken to Captain Robert de Baudricourt, the commander who oversees the town's defences. Her voice is steady, her request bold. A mere girl, travelling alone, asking for the ear of a hardened captain. It is almost enough to make them laugh. But she does not waver. Something in her composure makes mockery feel out of place. After a brief exchange of confused glances, they send a messenger inside. Vaucouleurs itself seems carved from the long fatigue of war. The walls bear the scars of passing seasons. The streets hold the wariness of a people accustomed to uncertainty. Yet, Beneath that heaviness, there is a heartbeat, a pulse of hope waiting for revival. Joan feels it as she waits, her hands clasped lightly before her. She senses that this town, quiet and careful, may be the threshold where her mission takes its first breath. When she is finally brought before de Baudricourt, he studies her with a frown more amused than concerned. He sees a peasant girl with wind-tousled hair and clothes unfit for winter's bite. Nothing about her suggests authority or divine commission. Everything about her suggests naivety. "What do you want, child?" he asks, not unkindly, but with the brisk impatience of a man who has little time for fantasies. Joan meets his gaze. "I must go to the Dauphin at Chinon. God commands it. France must be saved." The room falls into a silence edged with disbelief. A faint smile tugs at the captain's mouth, one shaped by duty, fatigue, and years of hearing desperate claims. But none as bold as this. He shakes his head. "Go home. Tend to your spinning. Leave war and kings to those meant for them." Joan bows slightly, but her eyes hold steady. "I cannot. This mission burns within me. I will return." And she does. The next day, and the next after that, her persistence becomes a quiet stir among the townspeople. They whisper about the girl who speaks with the certainty of someone far older. Some find her strange. Others find her unsettling in her unwavering calm. Children watch her pass with curiosity, sensing something unusual in her presence. Even the guards begin to glance at her differently, no longer with ridicule, but with puzzled respect. Days pass, and Joan continues to seek an audience with de Baudricourt. Each time he dismisses her. Each time she leaves the room with dignity that belies her youth. Her resolve does not crack, not even at the edges. Then one evening, as the sun lowers behind the hills, she returns again. Her cheeks are flushed from cold, but her voice carries its familiar steadiness. She speaks not of herself this time, but of France, of battles lost, of the suffering of towns like hers, of the Dauphin uncertain of his crown. And then something shifts. She looks at de Baudricourt with an intensity that unsettles even him. "The English will win a great victory," she says, "unless the Dauphin receives me. I am sent to bring him hope." It is not the first prophecy he has heard in his life, but it is the first spoken without hesitation, without theatrics, without any trace of madness. It is delivered like truth, simple, soft, inevitable. Word travels through Vaucouleurs faster than winter wind. A girl claiming divine voices. A girl foretelling the tide of war. A girl who keeps returning no matter how many times she is turned away. Curiosity grows. So does the faint, flickering ember of belief. Those who meet her describe her presence in hushed tones. Not dramatic, not fiery, but strangely luminous, as though she carries a lantern lit from somewhere beyond the visible world. Her confidence is not the loud kind that demands attention, but the gentle, unshakable kind that dissolves resistance. Within the captain's circle, skepticism begins to bend. Not break, not yet, but soften like ice under early spring sunlight. Soldiers overhear her words and find themselves thinking about her long after she leaves the room. Some laugh in discomfort. Some feel unease. A few feel hope. De Baudricourt himself grows restless. He tries to dismiss her, but her image lingers in his mind. A young girl who speaks of crowns and kingdoms as though recounting a memory. He does not believe her, not fully, but he cannot ignore the quiet gravity that surrounds her. Then the news arrives. A military setback, grim and unexpected, exactly as Joan had warned. The captain's expression changes the moment he hears it. Something in his certainty cracks open, letting in a sliver of possibility. He remembers her calm voice, her unwavering eyes. He remembers her prophecy delivered without fanfare, as though she were simply repeating a message handed to her. A girl from Domrémy could not know such things, unless the thought sits with him through the night heavy as a stone. By morning, Vaucouleurs has shifted. A threshold has opened. The gatekeepers who once saw her as a foolish child now regard her with wary wonder. The air around her feels different, charged with a quiet, undeniable purpose. Even the guards at the door greet her with softened expressions. When de Baudricourt summons her again, his voice holds a new tone, not belief, but respect. Perhaps belief will come later. For now, he simply listens. Night still clings to the edges of the sky when Joan mounts her horse and turns toward the long road ahead. The air is cold, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant smoke, as if France herself exhales a weary breath. She wears the clothes of a man, rough, plain, and unfamiliar, yet she sits with the unself-conscious balance of someone born to more than she understands. Beneath the disguise, her heart beats with a trembling certainty. Heaven has asked her to go, and so she goes. The path out of Vaucouleurs curves through a land shaped by war. Fields once golden with wheat now lie bruised and torn, turned to mud by marching feet and heavy hooves. Villages crouch under the weight of burned rooftops and shattered walls. The silence feels thick, as if the people who once laughed here have only recently stepped away, leaving their lives half-folded in the dust. Joan feels their absence like a wound. She wonders if her steps, humble, fragile, improbable, will matter to these empty homes. Yet the voices have told her she must reach the Dauphin, and she holds to that command like a thread of light. Her companions ride with a wary vigilance. Their eyes scan the tree line, the hills, the ruined corners where danger might be waiting. But Joan keeps her gaze forward, trusting the invisible strength she feels around her. She remembers St. Michael's tone, bright, unwavering, carved from courage, and St. Catherine's gentleness, a voice like the brush of candlelight against the soul. They have not spoken since she left the village, yet she senses them nearby, watching as she crosses into the unknown. Faith becomes the armor she does not yet wear. The road winds through forests where branches knit overhead, forming shadowed tunnels that swallow sound. Hooves crunch softly over fallen leaves. Every now and then, a bird takes flight, startled by the sight of riders passing through territory long abandoned by peace. Here, the war feels like a ghost following close behind. Stories circulate of bandits, of English scouts moving like smoke through the woods, of villages taken and retaken until their names lose meaning. Joan listens, but fear does not settle in her heart. She believes she is protected, not from harm, perhaps, but from losing her purpose. As the sun rises, pale and hesitant, they reach a crossroads where a small shrine leans toward the road. Its wooden form is cracked, the paint long faded, yet someone has placed fresh flowers at its base. Joan stops. The men watch her quietly as she kneels, touching the petals with the reverence of someone greeting a friend. She whispers a prayer, not for safety, not for victory, but for clarity. "Let me do what I must," she breathes. The world holds still for a moment, as if listening. Further along, they approach villages where doors hang open like broken wings. Smoke from old fires lingers in the air. Yet occasionally, in a tucked corner or behind shuttered windows, Joan glimpses movement, a child darting out to fetch water, an old woman sweeping a doorway, a soldier leaning against a post with a tired, watchful gaze. When these strangers see her, disguised but radiant with purpose, something flickers in their eyes: curiosity, disbelief, perhaps even hope. Word of the girl from Domrémy has travelled farther than she imagined. She rides on, carrying the weight of these silent expectations. At midday, they stop by a river where winter clings stubbornly to the banks. Joan drinks from the cold water, watching it swirl in patterns like threads being woven into something unseen. The men speak in low voices, debating which route will bring them to Chinon without crossing English patrolled ground. Joan listens, then quietly points toward the narrower, more difficult path. "That way," she says, not because she knows the terrain, but because something in her heart leans in that direction. The men exchange glances but follow. Her certainty, though untrained, feels strangely trustworthy. The journey grows harder as they enter regions where fear has settled deep into the earth. Fortified outposts stand half-manned, their soldiers hollow-eyed from sleepless nights. Bridges creak with age and disrepair. At one crossing, a group of travelers warns them to turn back. English soldiers had ridden through only days ago. Joan listens calmly, thanking them, but she does not turn back. She feels the path unspool before her like a story already written. The men ride after her, realizing with quiet astonishment that their courage seems steadier when she is near. In the evenings, when they set camp beneath the pale shimmer of stars, Joan sits slightly apart, wrapped in her borrowed cloak, staring into the fire as though it carries messages older than memory. The men watch her sometimes, not intrusively, but in the way one watches a rising dawn. They wonder who this girl truly is, what force moves her through danger without hesitation. Joan wonders too, in her private thoughts. She is still only 17, and the world she has entered feels vast and heavy, yet something inside her does not bend. Days pass like beads sliding along a string. France opens before them, wounded yet strong in ways only the suffering can understand. Each mile deepens Joan's understanding of the land she has been called to save. She sees its brokenness, its resilience, its quiet longing for deliverance. She carries these impressions gently, the way one carries fragile relics. When at last they catch sight of Chinon, its towers rising faintly against the horizon, washed in the fading gold of late afternoon, Joan feels her breath still. The castle appears distant, almost dreamlike, suspended between possibility and doubt. The Dauphin waits within those walls, a prince burdened by uncertainty. She wonders if he is ready to hear what heaven has asked her to say. She wonders if she herself is ready to speak it. But she knows this. The journey has shaped her. The road, with all its dangers and silences, has prepared her heart for what comes next. She presses her heels gently to her horse. The final stretch unfolds beneath her as softly as a prayer. And as the gates of Chinon come into view, Joan feels the stir of destiny, quiet and undeniable, humming through the air like the first note of a song that has waited centuries to be heard. The great hall of Chinon breathes with the weight of too many doubts. Candles flicker along high stone walls, their flames bending in the draught that slips through unseen cracks, as though even the castle itself hesitates to trust what unfolds here. Courtiers stand in clusters of brocade and whispering silk, watching the doorway through which a peasant girl, barely 17, dust still clinging to her boots, is expected to enter. The tension swells like an unseen tide rising against the shore. Charles, the Dauphin of France, does not sit upon the ceremonial throne at the heart of the chamber. Instead, he stands disguised among his nobles, cloak drawn close, expression carefully schooled into softness. He hides not out of cruelty, but uncertainty. For years, the crown has hung above him like a dream he is unworthy to claim. France fractures under English pressure, and Burgundy withdraws its loyalty like a shadow slipping out of sunlight. The young prince has been raised on fear, hesitation, and counsel soaked in doubt. Now he waits to see if this girl, rumored to carry heaven's command, can truly find him without guidance. When Joan enters the hall, she pauses for only a heartbeat. The air is thick with perfume, with the murmur of silk and suspicion, with the elegant stiffness of a court that has long forgotten miracles. Her eyes sweep gently across the crowd. She does not search with the frantic urgency of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Rather, she listens to something within herself, something quiet and luminous. And then she walks forward. She moves past the richly dressed noblemen pretending at authority, past the courtiers whose jewels catch the candlelight like fragments of broken stars. past the false king seated on the throne as part of the test. Without hesitation, Joan turns toward a modest figure standing to the side, a man who blends too easily into the gathered crowd. She bows her head, not in fear, but in recognition that runs deeper than sight. "Gentle Dauphin," she says softly, "my lord brings you good news." The hall stills. A wave of silence breaks over the gathered company. Not shocked, but reverent, as though something ancient has brushed through the room. Charles stares at her, startled, his disguise lying suddenly thin between them. He had not believed she would find him. Perhaps he had even hoped she would fail, for then the burden of destiny would fold back into the folds of doubt where he has kept it all these years. Yet she has faced him with clarity, and the truth presses upon him like the weight of sunlight after too long in shadow. A faint tremor passes over his face. Not of fear, but of being seen, truly seen. Joan speaks again, her voice steady as a prayer woven into the wind. She tells him that God has sent her to lift the siege of Orléans, to lead him to Reims, and to see him crowned king. Her words are simple, with no flourish, no courtly polish, no manipulation. They fall into the great hall like seeds, each carrying the potential to alter the shape of the future. Some courtiers scoff beneath their breath, their disbelief swirling like dark dust in the corners. Others lean forward despite themselves, caught by the quiet, strange fire of her certainty. A girl should not speak like this, not to a prince, not in a chamber soaked with politics, not in a time where hope has grown thin as worn linen. Yet she does, and her conviction is a mirror in which France glimpses its own forgotten courage. Charles studies her carefully. He hears something in her tone that the ambitious and cunning among his advisers have never offered: sincerity untouched by personal desire. She does not seek favor, she asks for no reward. Her presence feels like a small flame protected, cupped in gentle hands. Vulnerable, yet steadfast against the wind, he leads her aside, away from prying ears, into a smaller chamber where tapestries hang like faded promises. He asks her questions, some born of political caution, others born of a frightened man desperate for reassurance. She answers each with the calm of someone who knows her truth does not depend on his belief. She speaks of visions, of saints who guide her, of the suffering of France as though she carries it in her chest. At one moment, something shifts. She leans forward, her voice lowering to a tremor of intimacy meant only for him. She recalls a private prayer, something he once whispered to God in the secret corners of his heart, something no advisor or courtier could have known. The world seems to stop. Charles feels the words strike him with gentle precision, as though heaven itself has reached down to touch the fear he has buried beneath layers of duty and self-doubt. He exhales, a slow unraveling of disbelief. For the first time in years, his shoulders lift as though the invisible chains of despair loosen slightly. His eyes glisten with a hope he is almost afraid to claim. When they return to the great hall, the courtiers search his face for meaning. They sense a shift, subtle but unmistakable. Charles speaks softly, but his voice carries through the chamber. "This maiden may indeed be sent by God." A murmur ripples outward like the first gentle movements of a long, frozen river thawing under sunlight. Joan stands quietly, her expression serene, as though she has merely delivered a message entrusted to her and nothing more. She does not bask in the attention. She simply waits for what comes next, guided by the steady glow within her. The court, once heavy with skepticism, now feels its atmosphere lighten, as though an unseen window has opened and let in a breath of fresh air. Hope, fragile, trembling, but undeniably present, begins to bloom, and in the heart of Chinon, a wary prince begins to imagine that the road to Reims may not be a dream after all. The city of Poitiers rests beneath a pale spring sky, its stone buildings warmed by the slow return of sunlight after the long winter. Yet within the bishop's palace, where Joan is brought for examination, the air feels cool and taut, as though the walls themselves are listening. The corridor echoes with the soft tread of scholars and clerics, their robes whispering like restless pages of old manuscripts. This is not a battlefield of swords and banners. It is a battlefield of questions. And Joan, a shepherd girl from Domrémy, walks at its center. The theologians gather in a vaulted chamber whose ceiling arches like a prayer held aloft. Candles burn along the walls, their flames steady and golden, illuminating faces lined with wisdom, suspicion, and the wariness of a country losing hope. They have been summoned from the University of Poitiers, some of the most learned minds in France. Their duty is to probe this girl's story until every shadow is named, every uncertainty exhaled. Joan does not shrink from their gaze. She stands simply, hands folded, her expression calm, not defiant, not trembling, only steady, like a small flame sheltered by unseen hands. The questioning begins. Who are the voices you claim speak to you? What signs have you been given? Why should France trust a child in matters of war? Their words accumulate like stones, heavy, insistent, layered. Yet Joan's answers flow with a clarity that surprises even those ready to dismiss her. She speaks of Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Stein, Margaret, names that stir centuries of devotion. She tells of their brightness, their peace, the weightless certainty that settles in her chest when they appear. She does not embellish. She does not falter. She offers no grand theological reasoning. She simply tells the truth as she has lived it, as naturally as describing the path home through the fields. Day after day, the theologians press harder. Some lean forward with genuine curiosity, noting every word. Others sit stiffly, arms folded, eyes narrowed as though trying to pierce a veil. A few feel anger, not at Joan, but at the possibility that heaven has chosen a girl rather than a scholar, a peasant rather than a priest. They ask her about her faith, her morality, her understanding of God's will. They dissect each moment she describes. The voices, the visions, the message she bears for the Dauphin. John listens carefully. Even when tired, she answers as though the truth inside her cannot be drained. When she does not know something, she simply says so. When they attempt to trick her, she smiles softly, as if aware of the shape of their questions before they finish speaking. One evening, after hours of examination, a cleric asks whether she believes she is in God's grace, a question designed to ensnare her. To claim certainty would be arrogance. To deny it would imply sinfulness. Joan pauses for a moment, her eyes gentle. Then she replies, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God keep me there." A murmur ripples through the hall. The cleric lowers his quill. It is not the answer they expected from an uneducated girl. It is the answer of someone rooted in faith so deeply that no trap can catch her. Nights in Poitiers stretch long. Joan is given a simple room, stone walls, a straw mattress, a wooden crucifix above the bed. The candlelight flickers across her face as she prays before sleeping, asking not for triumph, but for guidance. Outside the window, the city hums softly, unaware that inside these walls the fate of France is quietly being shaped by conversations in dimly lit chambers. Word spreads through Poitiers that the maid is being tested. Some townsfolk wait near the palace gates, hoping to glimpse her as she walks between sessions. They whisper that she carries herself with a peace unusual for one so young. They see no madness in her eyes, no trembling, only the calm of someone who believes she is living the story she was meant to walk. As weeks pass, the theologians grow uneasy, not because they find fault, but because they do not. Her answers remain consistent, her demeanor unforced. She shows no signs of deception. If anything, she seems impatient only for action, not recognition. When asked why she presses so urgently to be sent to Orléans, she responds simply, "The soldiers are dying. France is suffering. I must go." It is difficult to argue with a heart that carries both conviction and compassion in equal measure. One evening, after a particularly intense round of questioning, a respected scholar confides quietly to his colleague, "If this maiden is not sent by God, then I do not know who could be." His companion nods, fingers tracing the edge of a worn manuscript. The skepticism that once pooled at their feet has begun to evaporate. At last, the examination reaches its end. The theologians gather in a solemn council, their parchment sheets covered with notes, observations, and hesitant admiration. They weigh everything: her words, her conduct, the consistency of her testimony, her refusal to contradict the Church's teachings. When every voice has been heard, the conclusion becomes clear. They find no fault in her. They find no lie in her. And although caution tempers their declarations, they agree the maid should be given a chance. Not because she is safe, but because she is extraordinary. A decision is drafted, sealed with wax, and carried to Chinon. The words are careful but unmistakably hopeful. Nothing improper has been found in the maiden. She may act upon her mission. When Joan hears the news, her eyes fill with quiet relief. Not triumph, not pride, relief. For now, the door opens toward the path she has long felt beneath her feet, the road to battle, where she will not wield argument but courage. The priests bless her. Courtiers watch her with new respect. Messengers ride out to prepare the army, and in the spring air that drifts through the courtyard, something stirs like a banner catching its first breath of wind. Joan is no longer simply a girl with visions. She is a recognized instrument of hope. The morning light over Chinon is muted, softened by a pale mist that drifts along the river like a lingering dream. It is the kind of light that makes everything feel suspended, as though time itself pauses to watch what unfolds. Joan walks through the courtyard with a quiet steadiness, her footsteps measured, her posture straight, her gaze far beyond the castle walls. She moves like someone carrying an unseen certainty, a promise whispered into her bones. Word has reached her. The sword she requested has been found. For days she had insisted that a blade waited for her in the chapel at Sainte Catherine da Fierbois, buried behind the altar, marked with 5 small crosses. She is certain of it, with that same inner clarity that has carried her through interrogation and judgment. And so a small group of men had gone to search, half out of courtesy, half out of skepticism. They found it exactly where she said. Now the sword rests in a velvet-wrapped bundle, carried by a squire who looks at it as if it might reshape the air around him. Joan accepts it with gentle hands, as though receiving something fragile, sacred. When she unwraps it, the steel glints in the misty light, simple, unadorned, but undeniably marked. 5 crosses etched into the blade. Precisely as her voices foretold, she lifts it carefully, testing its balance. It is neither heavy nor delicate. It sits in her hand as though it has been waiting for her grasp. She breathes slowly, reverently, sensing not the power of a weapon, but the weight of purpose. This sword, she murmurs, is not for killing. It is for guiding. And for a moment the courtyard grows still, as if listening. Later armourers come to fit her with a suit crafted in bright, immaculate white. They take her measurements, adjust each plate, and secure each strap. The armour gleams like winter sunlight against her tunic. As the last piece clicks into place, she straightens, and the weight settles on her shoulders. It is heavy, yes, but it does not burden her. Instead, she carries it like someone wearing a promise. The soldiers watching from the edges shift uneasily. They are men who have seen war swallow hope 100 times over, men who know the bitterness of retreat and hunger and uncertainty. Yet seeing her stand there, small in stature, young in years, but radiant with something more than courage, they fall into a hush that feels like the first breath of prayer. Is she truly the one? A man whispers, "I do not know." Another replies, "But look at her, she believes." Belief, it seems, can be contagious. Beside the armor and sword lies another gift, the banner she has commissioned. Joan had described it carefully: white cloth, the purity of it unmarred, lilies embroidered along the edges, and at the center, the name of Jesus written like a blessing across the fabric. At the top, an image of Christ in judgment, flanked by angels that seem to lean forward, caught in a divine wind. When the banner is unfurled, it ripples in the cool morning air, catching the mist, glowing faintly as though lit from within. This, Joan says softly, is more dear to me than the sword. She lifts it, and the cloth sways above her, a white flame against a grey sky. The soldiers watch, and something shifts in their faces. Curiosity softens into awe. Doubt melts into a quiet, tentative trust. A captain steps forward. He has fought in more battles than Joan has lived years, and his armor bears the scars of both victory and loss. He kneels, not with ceremony, but with a tired man's surrender to hope. "Joan," he says, "if you lead us, we will follow." The words ripple through the courtyard like a stone dropped into still water. One by one, soldiers bow their heads, not in worship, but in fragile, awakening faith. Joan, overwhelmed, lowers her gaze in humility, for she knows she is not the source of this hope, only its carrier. Days pass in a slow gathering of strength. Horses are saddled, weapons inspected, provisions loaded. Yet even amidst the bustle, there is a strange gentleness that follows Joan wherever she walks. She speaks to the soldiers not as a commander barking orders, but as someone tending to tired souls. She asks their names, listens to their fears, blesses them with simple prayers that steady trembling hearts. At night, she kneels in quiet corners of the camp, hands folded, whispering into the silence. The men watch her from afar, moved not by spectacle, but by sincerity. They begin to speak differently around the fires, less of defeat, more of possibility, not because she promises victory, but because she reminds them of something they had nearly forgotten, that France might still rise. On the morning of departure, the sky clears, revealing a soft blue that stretches across the horizon. Joan mounts her horse with practiced ease, the armor catching the sunlight, the banner rising like a small piece of heaven above the assembly. The men gather behind her in steady formation, a human tide waiting for the winds to shift. She looks over them, her face calm, eyes luminous with conviction. "We ride to lift a siege," she says, "but also to lift the hearts of all who have forgotten hope." Her voice is not loud, yet it carries through the ranks like a warm, steady current. The soldiers sit taller. The horses paw at the earth with restless anticipation. Something stirs, not in the air, but in the marrow of every listening man. For a moment, it feels as though all of France holds its breath. Joan raises her banner. It catches the wind and unfurls with a soft, triumphant flutter. "Forward," she whispers, and the army moves. They march not with the grim resignation of beaten men, but with the dawning courage of those blessed by a spark they do not fully understand. Joan rides at the front, sword at her side, banner above her, a living paradox of innocence and fire. Around her, the world seems to lean forward, as if history itself is watching, waiting. Far ahead, the smoke of Orléans rises into the sky. The storm is gathering. The road to Orléans winds like a frayed thread through a landscape scarred by war. Burned fields stretch on either side, the earth blackened where armies have passed, and abandoned farmhouses stand like hollowed-out shells, whispering of families who fled long before hope seemed possible. Joan rides at the front of her small force, the white banner lifting and falling with the rhythm of her horse. It is a bright, fragile thing moving through a wounded world. As they draw nearer to the besieged city, distant bells toll, thin, wary, desperate. The sound chills the air. For months, Orléans has been trapped under the tightening grip of English forces, its people clinging to life within crumbling walls, waiting for a miracle they no longer expect. Joan's arrival is not a miracle, but it feels like one. The army approaches the Loire River first, where the water glimmers beneath a sun already sinking into the horizon. The boats waiting there rock gently, as though nodding in silent welcome. It is late, later than any sensible commander would choose for a crossing, but Joan insists they go now, not at dawn. Dawn, she says, belongs to the weary. Tonight belongs to the brave. The soldiers obey, moved by something beyond strategy. They board the boats, gripping their weapons, watching her as if she is a lantern guiding them through darkness. The river carries them forward with surprising calm, the water whispering against the wooden hulls. John stands at the prow of the lead vessel, banner held high, armor catching the last gold of daylight. When they reach the opposite bank, the city rises before them, a heavy silhouette against the bruised sky, its walls pocked by months of assault, its towers leaning like tired sentinels. Torches flicker along the ramparts, dim and wavering. The gates creak open with a groaning sound that echoes through the night. As John enters Orléans, the people gather in the streets, drawn by rumor, hope, disbelief. They had expected a hardened warrior, a seasoned commander. Instead, they see a young girl in shining armor, carrying a banner painted with lilies and holy names. She looks too soft, too slight, and yet, when she lifts her face toward them, they feel something shift inside, as if a window they had long boarded shut has cracked open again. A woman steps forward, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. "You're the maid," she whispers. Joan nods gently. "God has sent us help," the woman sobs. "He has remembered us after all." The defenders gather around Joan like moths drawn to a small, unwavering flame. Many have fought for months with failing hope, watching comrades die, supplies dwindle, and morale sink like a stone into dark water. But tonight, seeing her, so calm, so certain, they feel a stirring deep within that they have not felt in a long while. She walks among them, offering simple blessings, touching rusted helmets, clasping trembling hands. Her presence quiets the chaos enough that the city seems to breathe, just for a moment. Even the fires burning on distant siege towers flicker with less menace, as if unsure how to behave in her company. But dawn comes with no softness. The English begin their assault early, their traps and engines groaning like metal beasts awakening. Arrows whistle across the river, clattering against stone, and the wind carries the shouts of soldiers lining the battlements. The defenders brace themselves, hearts pounding, while Joan stands at the southern tower, her banner rippling beside her like a white flame. "Do not fear," she calls. "Stand firm. God is with us." Her voice is not loud, but it reaches them, somehow reaching every trembling corner of the ramparts. Men who have fought for years without hope feel their spines straighten. Women carrying water to the wounded feel their steps grow steadier. The battle opens like a thunderclap. English longbowmen release volley after volley, their arrows falling like dark rain. Some defenders step back in instinct, flinching beneath the storm. Joan remains still, eyes steady. The men look at her, watching the arrows arc overhead, and something inside them settles. If she does not retreat, how can they? She steps closer to the parapet. "Hold," she says softly, and the word feels like a prayer. Hours pass in a blur of noise and dust. The defenders push forward, the English push back. Siege engines creak and groan like dying beasts. Smoke drifts across the battlements in dense, stinging clouds. Then, in the thick of the clash, Joan sees a weakness, a hesitation at the English bastille nearest the river. She calls for the French commanders. "Now," she insists, "there, press them there, and they will fall." Her certainty is a force stronger than steel. The push begins. French soldiers surge toward the Bastille, their cries lifting through the smoke, their feet pounding the earth with renewed determination. The English respond with fierce defense, unleashing another volley of arrows. One arrow strikes Joan's shoulder, driving deep into her flesh. She falls, gasping, and for a brief, breathless moment the world stops. The defenders cry out in horror. Some falter, some nearly break. But Joan, pale with pain, forces herself upright. Blood stains her armor, yet her hand reaches for her banner. She rises to her feet slowly, breath trembling, but her eyes ablaze with something fierce and unbroken. "You have not won," she declares. "I am still here." Her voice slices through the clamour like a bell through fog. The French rally, surging forward with a cry that shakes the earth. The English, startled by the impossible sight of a wounded girl rising again, begin to falter. Confusion ripples through their ranks, doubt follows. Then fear. By late afternoon, the Bastille collapses under French assault. The defenders of Orléans press outward with renewed fury, torching enemy structures, driving back the shaken English. By evening, the entire English line fractures, then breaks entirely, retreating across the fields with a desperation they once inspired in others. Inside the city, bells ring wildly, joyously. People who had long forgotten how to celebrate pour into the streets, embracing soldiers, weeping openly. Joan stands among them, exhausted but luminous, her face soft with gratitude rather than triumph. This victory is not hers alone. She knows that deeply. It belongs to the people of Orléans, who fought with hearts rekindled. It belongs to God, whose whisper she carried into battle. It belongs to France, awakening from despair like a nation remembering how to breathe. Yet everyone looks at her with reverence, as though she is the hinge upon which the entire war has turned. As night settles over the liberated city, Joan walks to the ramparts once more. She gazes at the quiet fields where the English once stood, now emptied, hushed. The breeze lifts her banner lightly, almost tenderly. She exhales, long and slow. One victory is not the end, it is only the beginning. Morning settles over the Loire Valley like a soft blessing, warm with possibility after the triumph at Orléans. Soldiers move quietly among the campfires, adjusting armor, tightening straps, speaking in hushed tones as if afraid to disturb the fragile miracle that has begun to unfold. In their midst rides Joan, small in stature, yet luminous with purpose, her banner lifting in the faint breeze like a living prayer. She feels the turning of the moment, a shift in the very breath of France. The road ahead is long, but it stretches forward with promise rather than despair. Charles, still only the Dauphin, waits for reassurance that the kingdom can be whole again. Joan carries that reassurance not in grand speeches but in the steady rhythm of her conviction. She believes the land is ready to move, ready to heal, ready to reclaim a destiny that has long felt slipping beyond its grasp. Every hoofbeat on the packed earth seems to echo a single idea: Reims. The march northward unfolds slowly, deliberately, like a pilgrimage. The army does not rush. Each step feels ceremonial, part of a larger ritual written in the annals of heaven. Town after town lies ahead, some wary, others uncertain, many resigned to English control or the influence of Burgundy. Yet something intangible travels with the young girl in white armor. Her presence feels like a dawn arriving early. At Sully, the gates open without hesitation. The townspeople gather along the road, offering bread, water, and whispered blessings. Parents lift their children to see the girl whose courage broke a siege that seemed impossible to lift. Joan bows her head to them, humbled by their reverence. She does not think of herself as a savior, only a servant of the voice that guides her. Yet the people cannot help but place hope upon her shoulders. Further along, at Auxerre, the leaders hesitate. Fear mingles with exhaustion, but the townsfolk surge first, cheering Joan's arrival, and suddenly the officials can no longer resist the tide of their own people's longing. They yield peacefully, swearing allegiance once more to Charles. Each submission feels less like conquest and more like a collective exile. A sigh of relief from a France tired of waiting for deliverance. The army moves through fields that shimmer with early summer light. Wheat nods in the breeze like worshippers bowing in prayer. Joan rides at the front, sensing the land itself stirring as if waking from a long sleep. She carries herself with quiet grace, but inside her heart is tender, full of awe at how swiftly the world responds when hope is given even a small spark. In Troyes, the tension is greater. Leaders argue. Some want to negotiate with the English-aligned garrison. Others want to wait, fearing Joan's reputation more than her sword. But Joan stands firm. Her voice is calm, steady, unwavering. She urges Charles's advisors to press forward, reminding them that hesitation is a luxury France can no longer afford. Days stretch into uneasy nights, filled with prayer and silent anticipation. Then, as if by divine persuasion rather than force, the city relents. The gates open, and the royal army enters without bloodshed. Joan breathes deeply as she crosses the threshold. Each victory without violence feels like a note in a sacred hymn, a melody rising towards something magnificent. She senses that the coronation is not simply political, it is spiritual, a ritual meant to bind the land back together and affirm the legitimacy that war alone cannot establish. Reims grows closer with every passing day. The towns on the approach welcome them eagerly, lighting candles, ringing bells, filling the streets with petals and praise. People speak of Joan in reverent tones, calling her La Pucelle, the maiden, believing she carries heaven's approval in her gaze. Children trail behind the horses, trying to mimic her posture, her quiet solemnity, as if courage might be learned by following in her footsteps. Yet Joan remains mindful of the weight of her purpose. Triumph is always shadowed by responsibility. She prays each night for clarity, kneeling in the stillness of her tent, listening for the familiar warmth of the voices. Sometimes they come, sometimes they do not, but the silence never frightens her. She trusts that heaven walks with her even when it does not speak. As they near Reims, the golden fields widen, and the countryside opens like a great cathedral roofed in sky. The soldiers sense the significance. They polish their armor, braid ribbons into the horses' manes, and move with renewed discipline. The Dauphin grows quieter, more contemplative, as though he finally believes he may soon become the king he was born to be. Reims itself waits like a long-lost dream. Its towers rise against the horizon, shimmering in the summer haze. The city sends word that it will welcome the royal retinue. No resistance, no hesitation, only anticipation. Joan feels emotion swell in her chest, gratitude, humility, and a subtle trembling of destiny aligning with the present moment. As the army enters the city, bells explode into joyous peals. Crowds fill the streets, pressing close to glimpse the maiden who has shepherded France back toward its rightful promise. They reach out to touch her stirrup, her banner, the hem of her tunic. Some weep openly. Joan feels the weight of their hopes settle gently around her, a mantle she receives with reverence. The cathedral looms ahead, vast and ancient, holding centuries of kings within its stone embrace. Joan gazes at it with awe, sensing the culmination of every step she has taken. The road has brought her here, not for glory, but to ensure that France may stand again with a rightful sovereign. Night falls softly over Reims as preparations begin for the sacred coronation. Candles glow in every window. The city hums with quiet excitement. Joan stands at the threshold of fulfillment, knowing that tomorrow will seal her mission with oil and prayer. And yet, as she looks toward the darkened sky, she feels the faint stir of another path waiting beyond the celebration. One she cannot yet see, but senses with the same certainty that guided her here. Dawn rises gently over Reims, its light brushing the stone towers of the cathedral as if waking an old guardian from sleep. The air hums with anticipation, thick with incense and the murmured footsteps of a city preparing to witness something it has nearly forgotten how to believe in. For the first time in years, France feels the promise of unity breathing softly at its gates. Within these ancient walls, a king will finally take his place. Inside the cathedral, candlelight flickers along the carved arches, casting warm shadows that dance like faint memories. Priests move quietly, adjusting altar cloths, polishing chalices, preparing the sacred oils that have anointed centuries of rulers. Their hands tremble slightly, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of tradition reawakening. Today is not a ceremony, it is a restoration. A long broken thread is being woven back into the fabric of the realm. Joan stands near the front of the nave, her white armor polished, her banner held in her steady grip. It rises gently above her, the holy names shining in the candlelit haze. She watches the preparations with reverence, feeling the gravity of the moment settle over her shoulders like a mantle. This is the culmination of the voice's command, the fulfillment she has walked miles, fought battles, and endured doubt to reach. Her heart beats with quiet awe. Charles enters the cathedral with measured steps, dressed not as a warrior, but as a man stepping toward the destiny that has long eluded him. His face reflects both relief and hesitation. He knows what this ceremony means: legitimacy, hope, renewal. But he also knows what lies beyond it. The road after a coronation is often harder than the one leading to it. Yet today he allows himself to stand fully in the present. The choir begins softly, their voices rising like mist, filling the vaulted ceiling with sound that feels older than stone. Joan closes her eyes for a moment, letting the harmonies wash through her. She remembers Orléans, the long nights of prayer, the fear she felt leaving Domrémy, the voices urging her onward. All of it has led here, to this convergence of faith and history. She senses the presence of heaven close by, as if watching through the cathedral's stained glass windows. As Charles approaches the altar, the archbishop lifts the sacred oils. The ceremony unfolds with solemn grace. Latin prayers roll through the air, ancient syllables that resonate like the heartbeat of the kingdom. Joan watches every movement, her breath steady, her emotions held in a delicate balance. She does not think of victory or glory. She thinks of purpose, the deep, shining certainty that she has done what was asked of her. When the oil touches Charles's forehead, the congregation exhales as one. A light trembles through the cathedral, not visible but deeply felt, as though the very stones recognize the weight of the moment. Charles kneels, and the prayer of anointing wraps around him like a cloak woven from centuries of tradition. He is no longer merely the Dauphin. He is, at last, King of France. Tears gather in Joan's eyes, shining like dew on morning grass. She lifts her banner high, holding it with the strength of someone who understands that this moment is greater than any single life. The soldiers behind her straighten their backs, pride warming their faces. They know the battles fought, the sacrifices made, the hope nearly lost and painfully regained. For a heartbeat, the realm stands whole. The crown is placed upon Charles's head. Bells erupt across the city, their joyful clamour flooding the streets. Outside, crowds cheer, embracing one another, crying openly, praying aloud. Inside, the king rises, and a hush falls over the cathedral like a soft blanket. He turns toward his people with a look that blends humility and renewed courage. Joan meets his gaze. She bows deeply, not as a subject but as the messenger who has delivered him to this threshold. Charles nods to her, gratitude shadowed by the knowledge that their paths may begin to diverge now. A king must govern with caution and counsel. A visionary walks with fire and uncompromising purpose. Their missions intersect but are not the same. The procession moves through the cathedral, filling the aisles with music, colour, and reverent excitement. Joan walks beside the king, her banner glowing in the softened light. She feels both fulfillment and an ache she cannot name, a sense that the clarity of her mission may not remain this bright forever. Triumph is fragile. Even miracles are finite. Outside, the people surge forward to see their newly crowned king and the girl who made this day possible. Flowers scatter underfoot, voices rise in blessing. Some call Joan a savior, others whisper of prophecy. She accepts the praise quietly, her gaze drifting toward the horizon, where the world seems to shift in subtle, unsettling ways. Though she stands in triumph, she senses that peace is always followed by a testing. As evening approaches, the cathedral grows quieter. The candles burn lower, their flames softening into trembling halos of gold. Joan returns inside for a moment, seeking stillness after the long ceremony. She kneels before the altar, the scent of incense curling around her like a gentle embrace. She whispers her gratitude, offering every step, every wound, every fear to the God who guided her. Yet as she prays, a faint shadow enters her thoughts, a question that lingers at the edges of her certainty. Now that the king is crowned, what remains for her? The voices have grown softer in recent months. The path ahead is less defined. She knows she has achieved what she was commanded, but she also knows the world beyond this triumph still trembles with conflict, doubt, and danger. Rising slowly, she looks once more at the glowing cathedral. The moment is fulfilled, but its glow feels fleeting, like the last light before nightfall. She clutches her banner, grounding herself in its familiar weight. There is still work yet to come. The coronation at Reims fades into memory, like the last note of a hymn lingering in the vaulted air. The cathedral's warmth remains with Joan, but outside its stone embrace, the world resumes its complicated rhythm. France is not yet whole. English strongholds still grip northern towns, and Burgundian alliances remain tangled like winter branches. Victory has opened a path, but it is not yet a road, merely a direction. Waiting for courage to carve the way, Joan feels this truth pressing against her heart. The voices that guided her to Reims once spoke with clarity, shaping her purpose with celestial firmness. Now they are softer, as though inviting her to walk by trust rather than instruction. She rises each morning expecting guidance, but often she finds only silence, a silence both humbling and unsettling. Charles, newly crowned, tastes the comfort of kingship. After years of exile and uncertainty, he now stands on solid ground. He is cautious, wary of risking the legitimacy he has only just secured. The court around him, advisors, nobles, and clerics, whisper their fears, reminding him of debts, negotiations, and political balances that must not be unsettled. Joan's bold certainty clashes with their calculated restraint. She urges Charles to continue the campaign, to march north and liberate Paris. The people, she insists, yearn for a France free from foreign chains. But hesitation grows in the royal chambers like a creeping fog. Some nobles distrust her influence, others fear the English reprisals. Some simply cannot understand how a peasant girl can see so clearly what they obscure with strategies and maps. Still, Joan does not falter. She carries the same purity of purpose that brought her to Orléans. But the road ahead is no longer straightforward. It twists with politics, envy, and doubt, forces more slippery than battlefield opponents. The army gathers again, though smaller and less eager than before. Some follow Joan out of devotion, others out of curiosity, still others, because they sense her mission is greater than any earthly hesitation. She rides at their head, her banner lifting into the wind like a piece of heaven fluttering above mortal struggle. Paris lies under Burgundian control, fortified and wary. Joan leads an attack on the city, her spirit blazing as fiercely as it did at Orléans. But this time support falters. Charles delays reinforcements. Commanders hesitate. Joan presses on, wounded in the leg but refusing to retreat until she is physically carried away from the barricades. Her heart ache is not from injury but from the realization that courage alone cannot overcome reluctance. The attempt to take Paris fails, and its failure marks a turning point. Where once her victories seemed ordained, now setbacks appear like shadows lengthening across her path. The court interprets caution as wisdom and wisdom as avoidance. Joan feels the air around her tighten, the bright trust of earlier days dimming under political strain. Yet she continues. When the king withdraws to the lawyer, Joan refuses to surrender her momentum. She asks permission to campaign independently, and Charles, perhaps relieved to distance himself from her intensity, grants her limited authority. With a small band of loyal soldiers, she moves to defend towns threatened by English and Burgundian forces. Autumn descends, cooling the land and slowing armies alike. Joan rides from village to village, offering protection, inspiring hope, comforting the frightened. Her presence is like a warm lamp carried into darkened rooms, steady, unpretentious, radiant. But the battles are harder now. Each victory feels fragile, each loss heavy. At Saint-Pierre-le-Montier, she rallies her men in a fierce assault that seems impossible. When they fall back in fear, she remains unmoving, her banner raised. "Forward," she says softly, as if speaking to their hearts rather than their ears. They return emboldened, and the town falls. It is a moment that echoes the faith of Orléans, reminding her that courage still has power. She clings to that memory, but she also senses that time is tightening around her. Political allies withdraw. Commanders avoid committing to her plans. Funds run thin. The glow that once surrounded her mission flickers under the weight of human resistance. The voices, too, retreat into quietude. Where once their messages were bright and insistent, now they come like distant bells at dusk. Faint, comforting, but no longer guiding with the same clarity. Joan wonders if she is meant to walk this stretch of her path alone, to be tested not in battle but in persistence. Winter gives way to spring. Compiègne becomes the next point of danger. A town threatened by Burgundian siege, Joan rides to its defense, determined to protect its people. The air feels heavy, charged with an unspoken warning. But she presses on, as she always has, forward, because forward is the direction of faith. The struggle for Compiègne is fierce and urgent. Joan leads sorties beyond the town's walls, wielding her sense of purpose like a shield against despair. The soldiers around her fight with renewed spirit, lifted by her unshakable resolve. Yet even here, support remains uncertain, fragmented by fear and shifting loyalties. Still, she will not abandon the people who look to her. She stands on the ramparts at dusk, watching the horizon burn gold as the sun dips behind distant trees. The air cools, the land grows quiet. This is the kind of evening that once brought her peace, the hour when heaven felt near. But tonight, she feels only the weight of uncertainty and the hush of a future she cannot read. And yet, she breathes deeply, grounding herself in the present. She has walked through doubt before. She has carried her mission through storms of disbelief. If the voices are silent, she will move by faith alone. For Joan, the path is never backward, only forward, always forward. Night settles gently over the fields near Compiègne, though the air feels taut, as if it senses the tremor forming beneath its own stillness. Joan rides along the outer defences with the same calm gravity she always carries into danger. A quiet awareness that life can tilt in an instant. The forest edges darken behind her, swelling with shadows that move like half-formed thoughts, while the river murmurs its slow warning beside the town walls. She feels the weight of a moment approaching, though she cannot yet name it. Her voices, once bright and warm as cathedral sunlight, have grown faint in recent weeks, not absent, only distant, as though calling to her from a far shore she cannot reach. Still, she presses onward. The siege must be lifted, the people must be defended. The mission must continue, with or without miracles to steady her hand. Compiègne stands as a fragile flame against the English and Burgundian forces circled around it. To lose it would be to lose hope along the northern frontier. Joan knows this, and so she remains here, insisting on leading the charge herself. The soldiers trust her more than the councils do. They see in her something undeniable, a courage that asks nothing for itself. She rides beside them not as a saint or symbol, but as a companion who shares their danger, their hunger, their sleepless nights beneath trembling stars. At dawn, she had rallied them with a few simple words, nothing ornate or rehearsed, just the quiet certainty in her voice that the gates must open, and they must break through the enemy lines before the encirclement tightens like a noose. Now, with dusk returning, she prepares for another sortie, her heart steady, her gaze forward. But the enemy has been watching, and tonight they move first. A sudden burst of noise cracks across the field. The clash of steel, the thud of hooves, a horn splitting the evening like a blade. Burgundian troops surge from the tree line, gathering momentum like a rising tide. Joan's horse shivers beneath her at the sound, but she urges it forward, calling to her men to form up, to hold their ground, to push back with the strength they still carry. The French scramble toward the gate. There is shouting from the ramparts, commands, warnings, fear flooding the stone corridors. The drawbridge remains open, but tension flares among the guards. They see the mass of Burgundian riders sweeping toward them, a storm of armor and dust. To leave the gate open is to risk the entire town. To close it is to leave those outside stranded in the darkening field. Joan does not think of the risk. She sees only her men falling back, overwhelmed by the sudden assault. She urges her horse ahead, placing herself between the enemy and the retreating line, striking with a clarity that rises not from visions but from instinct and years of hardship. She is small amid the chaos, but she moves with purpose, with the quiet ferocity of someone who believes entirely in the righteousness of her stand. Her banner lifts above her, white, bright, unyielding, a fragile flame against the oncoming flood. The retreat becomes a desperate rush. Her men call to her, begging her to fall back. She turns, guiding them toward the gate, her voice cutting through the din, soft yet commanding. But the danger grows faster than courage can counter it, and from the walls comes the order she dreads. The drawbridge must be raised. She hears the chains before she sees the motion, the slow, terrible groan of the mechanism. The wooden platform begins to rise behind her, pulling upward like a curtain closing upon a stage. Her breath stills, her horse surges forward, but she knows she will not make it in time. She remains outside. Her soldiers watch from the safety of the walls, their expressions breaking like wounded glass. Some shout her name. Others bow their heads, but the Burgundians reach her before any hope can descend from heaven. Their hands seize her, pulling her from her saddle. She struggles, but not in fear, in duty, in heartbreak, in the desperate desire to stay with the mission she has carried like a second heartbeat. The enemy binds her, their ropes rough against her wrists, their armor cold as winter iron. She is placed upon a horse not her own, an animal that does not know her, does not recognize the gentleness of her usual touch. Around her, the battlefield stills, the world narrows. The sky deepens into a bruised twilight as though marking the moment with its own sorrow. Yet Joan does not weep. Her breathing steadies. Her gaze lifts toward the walls of Compiègne, toward the men who still watch from above, torn between relief and agony. She gives them no sign of despair. She sits upright, her spine straight, her face calm, not because she feels no fear, but because courage for her has never been the absence of fear. It has always been the act of meeting it without flinching. Chains close around her wrists. They do not silence her spirit. For the first time, she is truly alone, no soldiers beside her, no banner in her hands, no voices whispering guidance, only the quiet hum of fate tightening around her, pulling her toward a destiny she cannot yet see. And yet, in this darkened hour, something within her remains brightly lit, a faith as steady as the moon rising above the fields she once protected. She is captured but unbroken, taken but not defeated, surrounded by enemies but held by a purpose stronger than any chain. As the Burgundians lead her away, her final glance returns to the town walls, lingering not in anger nor in sorrow, but in the quiet acceptance that the path forward now belongs to another chapter. One written not on the battlefield, but in the shadows where trials replace triumph. The days pass slowly in her dim-lit cell, each one drifting like a thin veil across a deeper truth she is beginning to understand. Not every chain is forged by enemies. Some are shaped quietly, invisibly, by the hands of those she once served. Joan sits on the narrow wooden bench, listening to the soft moan of the wind through the shutters, feeling the weight of the world settle around her. She does not fight the silence. She lets it speak. News travels slowly to prisoners, filtered through guards' whispers and passing servants who cannot help but look upon her with a mixture of pity and awe. But eventually, even the stone walls cannot keep the truth from her. France has not moved. No envoys plead for her release. No armies assemble for her freedom. The king she crowned at Reims, the man she risked everything to lift onto his rightful throne, has turned his gaze elsewhere. Politics, they say, negotiations, strategy, words that roll coldly through the corridors of power, indifferent to the fate of the young woman who once carried the kingdom's hope as lightly as a banner in the wind. The Burgundians hold her now, their authority trembling under the weight of her presence. They know she is more than a prisoner. She is a symbol large enough to tilt alliances. They do not harm her, yet, instead, they consider offers, weigh purses, and speak of her future as though discussing a horse or a parcel of land. Men gather in rooms far from her sight, arguing over her value, calculating the worth of her spirit in francs and favours. And slowly, inevitably, the English purse grows heavier than any French promise. 10,000 francs. A sum so precise, so transactional, it seems to strip away the last remnants of nobility from the moment. The decision clicks into place like a lock sealing a door. The Burgundians agree to the sale, the English accept. A young woman is priced, purchased and prepared for transfer. To Joan, the news arrives not as a blow, but as a quiet, settling truth, like the final note of a song she has long felt approaching. She breathes in, steady, calm. She has always known her path would not lead back to the fields of Domrémy or the open skies of battle. Her voices warned her softly. In those early days, you will be taken, but fear not. God will be with you. She did not imagine the taking would feel like this, so steeped in political chill, so devoid of loyalty. The guards notice her serenity. They expect tears, pleas, fury. They expect her to cling to the cell bars and demand justice. But Joan does none of this. She remains still, her fingers lightly tracing the wooden grain of the bench, her thoughts rising beyond the walls, the soldiers, the negotiations. She thinks of saints who spoke to her, of the angel's bright assurance, of the mysterious warmth that once wrapped her spirit when courage was demanded of her. It still lingers, faint but present, a distant flame guiding her through unfolding darkness. The Burgundians, in their own way, feel the weight of what they have done. Selling a prisoner is not uncommon, but this prisoner carries a gravity that unsettles even hardened men. Some avoid her eyes. Others bow their heads as they escort her through the courtyard, unable to withstand the quiet clarity in her gaze. She looks at each of them not with anger, but with a kind of sorrowful compassion. It is disarming. The day of her transfer arrives, draped in grey clouds. The morning air is cool, damp with the scent of earth and distant rain. Joan walks between soldiers who do not touch her more than necessary, as if unsure whether their hands are worthy of the task. She steps carefully onto the waiting cart, its wooden frame creaking under her slight weight. No crowd gathers, no French banner waves. Only the soft rhythm of hooves begins the journey toward ruin, toward trial, toward a destiny sealed in ink long before it is voiced aloud. But Joan remains calm. She remembers fields of her childhood where wheat swayed like seas of gold. She remembers hearing the church bells ring at dusk, and the way light would fall across her village in warm, forgiving tones. She remembers the moment she first heard the voices, how the air had grown still, how the world felt suddenly touched by something sacred. Those memories rise around her now, forming a shield stronger than steel. The English guards watch her with guarded curiosity. To them, she is a strange prisoner, too quiet, too composed, too young to hold such vast symbolic power. They speak of her in hushed tones, wondering at the courage in her stillness. They cannot understand it. To them, captivity should crush a spirit, not refine it. But Joan's serenity does not come from resignation. It comes from trust, not in kings who falter, not in armies who retreat, but in the divine promise that threads through her life like a whispered vow. Nothing that happens to her is beyond the gaze of heaven. As the cart rattles over uneven roads, she lifts her eyes to the sky. It is pale, muted, layered with drifting clouds, a quiet sky, a waiting sky. She wonders if the saints watch her from beyond its veil, offering strength in silence. She imagines them walking beside her, unseen but present, just as they once guided her through fire and triumph, sold, betrayed, abandoned by the crown she lifted, yet at peace. Because her mission was never to secure safety for herself. It was always to obey the call that stirred her heart, no matter where it led. And now, as the road curves toward ruin, Joan feels the path narrowing, turning from battlefields to something more intimate, more perilous, more profound. Her courage must change shape now, not the courage of sword or strategy, but the courage of truth spoken under threat, of faith held under scrutiny, of light carried into the darkest chambers of judgment. She is ready. The room is colder than winter, though no snow touches the ground. It is a cold born not of season but of intention, a deliberate chill meant to weaken resolve. Joan enters quietly, her chains whispering against the floor, and the men who wait for her do not rise. They watch her with a mixture of suspicion, calculation, and something sharper than hatred, fear, not of her strength, for she is only 19 and wounded from war. Not of her sword, for she carries none now. They fear the way people speak her name, as if a miracle once walked among them. She sits, and the trial begins. The questions come like nets thrown into deep water, wide, tangled, meant to catch her off guard. A bishop leans forward, his voice smooth as polished stone, asking about her visions. Did she see them with her eyes or her imagination? Did she speak with spirits or saints? Did she truly believe heaven chose her? The words slide toward accusation, each crafted to lead her toward a confession she does not owe. Joan listens, breathes, and answers without hesitation. She has nothing to hide. Her voice is steady, unmoved by their tone. I saw them with the eyes of my soul, she says, clearer than I see you now. Some of the men shift in their seats. They did not expect her to speak with such clarity, such unshaken simplicity. Day after day, the interrogations continue. They ask her about her banner, about the sword discovered behind the altar at Fierbois, about her armor and the way soldiers looked at her as if she carried daylight itself. They ask her why she dresses in male clothing. They ask if she believes she is in God's grace, a question designed to trap her between blasphemy and presumption. Joan pauses only once. She lifts her gaze, meeting theirs not as enemies, but as men standing on the edge of their own fear. If I am not, may God bring me into it, she says. If I am, may God keep me in it. The answer is so perfect, so doctrinally precise, so untouchable, that several theologians who hoped for her downfall glance away in frustration. But the bishop in charge presses on. He cannot allow her even the smallest victory. Too much rides on her silence. Too much depends on breaking the symbol she has become. The room grows darker as days bleed into weeks. Joan's exhaustion settles slowly into her bones. She sleeps in a soldier's prison, guarded by men rather than nuns, though church law demands otherwise. She is denied the simple dignity owed to a prisoner of conscience. Her wrists ache from shackles. Her feet burn from standing long hours during questioning. Still, her answers remain bright at the edges, like a candle refusing to dim. When they challenge her visions, she stands on the memory of them. When they accuse her of pride, she bows her head. When they twist her words, she straightens them with honesty that cuts through their arguments. She is untrained, unschooled, yet her thoughts are clear, her faith unbroken. Every now and then, late at night, when the cold becomes a weight pressing on her skin, she wonders why heaven is silent. The voices that once guided her steps, Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, Saint Margaret, no longer speak. She does not feel abandoned. She feels tested. Faith, she has always believed, is not only the sweetness of hearing but the endurance of silence. And so she endures. The judges, however, are not patient. Their purpose is not truth but conclusion. They need her to confess to heresy, witchcraft, or illusion. They need proof that the girl who lifted France is not a holy sign but a dangerous aberration. To them, Joan is not a maid. She is a disruption. Her courage stirs the people. Her victories shame those who doubted. Her devotion stands where their politics falter. So they set another snare. They ask about the voices that guided her in battle. Did they command her? Did she believe she must obey them over church authority? A wrong answer would make her a heretic. A hesitant answer would make her a liar. Joan breathes slowly, sensing the trap, and speaks with the tenderness she once used when comforting soldiers before battle. They guided me, she says, but I am God's servant. I obey him first in all things. Again, the net slips through her grasp. The bishop's lips tighten. Some days, the trial shifts from interrogation to endurance. The judges repeat the same questions, hoping confusion or weariness will weaken her. They twist small details from her past, bringing up moments she barely remembers. They read her earlier answers back to her, seeking contradictions that do not exist. Joan listens to these recitations as if hearing echoes from a distance. She corrects them gently when needed. She does not argue. She simply speaks the truth as she knows it, and truth has a way of unsettling those who do not seek it. The people of Rouen talk quietly in the streets. Some pity her. Some fear being seen pitying her. Word spreads that the girl who saved Orléans stands alone against a council of learned men. Yet even alone, she does not bend. Then comes a morning when Joan is led into the great hall, and the judges read aloud the charges: heresy, sorcery, blasphemy, the crime of dressing as a man. Words pile like stones placed deliberately to weigh down a life. She listens in silence, each accusation passing over her like a winter wind. She knows they are not judging her deeds. They are judging the meaning others found in her. When they demand her submission to their authority, she is torn. The church, she believes with all her heart, is God's house on earth. To reject it would wound her faith. Yet the men before her twist that authority into something sharp and self-serving. She sees the distortion, feels it, and still must navigate it with humility. I love the church, she says softly, and I ask only that I may be guided rightly. But guidance is not what they offer. At last, after weeks of questioning, pressure, and spiritual solitude, her strength wavers. They threaten her with execution by fire, a death so terrifying that even the bravest knights fear it. They place a document before her, heavy with legal intricacy she cannot fully understand, and demand her signature. Her heart trembles not for her life, but for the fear that such a death, so violent and final, might seem like abandonment of her mission. In a moment of anguish, surrounded by men who loom like shadows, she signs. But peace does not follow. The men rejoice too easily, too eagerly. Their smiles feel wrong. The silence in her heart feels wrong. And in the days that follow, when her conditions worsen and her torment multiplies, Joan understands the truth. Her surrender does not save her. It only deepens the shadows around her. So she retracts it, standing once more before the judges, with her strength bruised, but her spirit fiercely awake. She lifts her voice. All that I said in fear of the fire. I trust in God. I retract nothing that I have done by his command. The hall freezes. Their victory vanishes like dust scattered by wind. A new sentence forms, harsher, irreversible. The shadows deepen. The verdict becomes a promise of flames. And Joan, hearing it, closes her eyes only for a moment, offering her fear to the silence where heaven once spoke. Dawn arrives softly over Rouen, stretching pale fingers across rooftops still damp with night. The city wakes slowly, as if reluctant to witness what the morning must hold. The air feels fragile, too thin for breath, as though even the sky is afraid to speak. And in the stillness of that early hour, the guards open Joan's cell. She rises without resistance. Her chains clink like faint wind chimes, fragile notes in a world weighed down by sorrow. She knows what this day is. She has sensed it in the silence of her prayers, felt it in the tightening of the world around her. Yet she does not tremble. Her faith has survived questions sharper than blades, shadows deeper than night. What remains to fear? Jesus, she whispers, the word a thread that ties her trembling human heart to the heavens she trusts. Two soldiers flank her as she steps into the corridor. Their armor glints in the dim light. They expect a prisoner broken by weeks of interrogation and isolation. Instead, they find a young woman walking as though the ground beneath her feet is sacred. Outside, the courtyard fills with murmurs. People gather like ghosts drifting through morning mist. Some come out of curiosity, some out of sorrow, some because they fear being seen absent. All feel the weight of the moment, a weight so heavy that even the stones beneath their feet seem to bow. John emerges into the open air, and a hush falls over the crowd. She is thin from imprisonment, her face pale, but there is something bright in her eyes, a flame untouched by the world's attempts to extinguish it. The bishop presiding over her condemnation stands nearby, his robes pristine, his expression guarded. He expects defiance or despair. He sees neither. What he sees unsettles him, a serenity he cannot name. Joan walks slowly, step by step, toward the platform where the stake waits. She whispers the name of Jesus again and again, each repetition a steadying hand upon her shoulder. To her, this path is not a march toward death, but a final act of fidelity. She has lived her life listening for heaven. Now she must leave this world with her ears fixed on the same sound. As she approaches, the wood stacked around the stake catches her eye. Rough, uneven logs, kindling packed tightly, a rope waiting to hold her steady in the flames. She looks at it with a calm not born of strength alone, but of surrender. A surrender not to her accusers, but to God. A priest is sent to speak with her, offering last rites. Joan accepts with gratitude, her voice soft, her responses steady. She knows the end is near, yet she speaks as though time has slowed into something gentle. Her every word becomes a lesson in courage, simple, unembellished, rooted in faith rather than fear. When the ceremony is done, the guards move to bind her. She closes her eyes, offering them a moment of stillness to make their work easier. Her feet are tied to the stake, her hands bound before her. She tilts her head upward, as though looking at an invisible horizon. The executioner waits for the signal. In the crowd, a few gasp as the officials step forward to read her sentence. Their voices sound distant, swallowed by the immensity of what is unfolding. Condemnation, heresy, recantation, relapse. The formal words feel hollow, brittle. They cannot contain the truth of her life. Joan listens without flinching. She has heard harsher judgments from men who feared the softness of faith. This moment, heavy as it is, carries no surprise. She knows that earthly courts cannot undo heaven's decisions. When the sentence ends, she speaks. "Bishop, I die through you." The words are not hatred, but clarity, a final declaration that sets truth gently upon the table for all to see. The bishop looks away. The executioner receives his order. He moves toward the pile of wood and lights a torch. The flame brightens against the pale morning, flickering like a restless spirit. For a moment it dances harmlessly in the breeze. Then he lowers it to the base of the platform. Smoke curls upward, cautious at first, then bold. The fire catches quickly, wood snapping in sharp bursts that echo against the stone walls. The heat gathers, pushing outward, then upward, rising toward the girl bound above it. Joan does not cry out, "Jesus," she whispers again, her voice trembling with devotion rather than fear. The flames climb slowly, as though reluctant to touch her. Smoke drifts around her, wrapping her in a soft grey veil. Her hair stirs in the rising heat. The fire crackles, hungry and patient. Then, as the flames draw near, she lifts her voice. It is not a scream, but a prayer, clear, bright, piercing through the thickening air. "Jesus, Jesus." Some in the crowd fall to their knees. Others cover their faces. A soldier nearby wipes tears from his eyes, whispering that they are killing a saint. The bishop looks stunned, unable to meet the sight of a girl whose courage holds a mirror to his own weakness. The fire roars. Joan does not. Her voice remains steady despite the rising heat, unwavering despite the smoke. "Jesus." As the flames climb higher, the wind shifts, carrying her final cry across rooftops, alleys, and distant fields. "Jesus," and then the sound fades. For a moment, the world is silent, a silence so complete it feels like the earth is holding its breath. Ash swirls gently, glimmering in the morning light. The fire settles into embers. The figure at the stake is still, but something remains, not visible, not tangible, but unmistakable, a presence that even the fire cannot consume. Those who witness it feel something shift inside them, something that will not easily be forgotten. A seed of memory planted in the cracks of history. When the executioner rakes through the ashes, he finds her heart unburned. He stops shaken. The bishop orders him to continue. The fire is stoked again, hotter, merciless. The heart still refuses to turn to ash. The crowd whispers. Fear ripples through the ranks of the powerful. The girl they condemned to silence speaks now through miracle. When the execution finally ends, when every ember dims and every whisper folds into the wind, the people linger long after they are told to leave. They carry with them a story too heavy to lift lightly, a memory too bright to fade. Rouen returns to its routines. Markets open, doors creak. But something in the air feels changed, as if the city itself struggles to return to ordinary breath. And somewhere above, beyond clouds that drift quietly over the Seine, a young soul moves toward the heaven she trusted more than life. Years drift like petals on a river after Joan's death, each carrying fragments of a story no flame can erase. Rouen moves on, but never completely. Its stones remember the girl who stood unshaken in the face of earthly fire. The smoke fades from the sky, yet the echo of her final cry lingers, carried by travelers, merchants, priests, and soldiers who cannot keep the memory contained. In the years that follow, France continues to struggle. The war grinds on, shifting like a restless tide, and the land bears the weight of uncertainty. Yet her name remains alive in quiet corners of the kingdom. Peasants speak of her in the dim glow of hearth fires. Soldiers murmur her courage before battle. Mothers tell their children of the maiden who believed heaven could break through the chaos of men. Her legacy becomes a soft, persistent heartbeat beneath the noise of the age. Charles VII, crowned by her efforts, rules on. History will remember his decisions with mixed tones, but none can deny what Joan gave him. a kingdom restored to possibility. He does not speak of her often, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of fear of reopening wounds he cannot mend. Yet even his silence cannot smother her memory. It grows in the spaces he leaves untouched. 20 years pass before the world takes its first step toward righting the wrong that ended her life. In 1450, with the war finally tipping toward France, King Charles orders a formal inquiry into the circumstances of Joan's trial. It is not an act of sentiment, but of necessity. A kingdom must clear the name of the girl whose courage helped save it. Still, beneath the political reasoning lies a deeper whisper, a recognition long overdue. The inquiry travels to Rouen, where those who witnessed her final days speak of her dignity, her unwavering voice, the injustice that wrapped itself around her like chains. Some recall the fear in the eyes of the judges. Others remember the miraculous heart that refused to burn. Bit by bit, truth rises from beneath the ashes. 5 years later, a second investigation intensifies the scrutiny. More testimonies surface. Scholars review the transcripts of her trial, shocked by the trap-laden questions, the coercion, the twisting of her simple words. They see clearly what the flames once hid. Joan was condemned not for her faith, but for the threat her truth posed to those who preferred shadows. By 1456, the church finally takes up the case in earnest. Joan's mother, Isabelle Romee, now old and burdened with more sorrow than one lifetime should hold, travels to Paris with her 2 remaining sons. She stands before the court, a woman worn yet unbroken, demanding justice for the daughter she raised in faith. Her voice trembles, but her resolve does not. In her plea, the world hears the echo of Joan's bravery. The retrial unfolds slowly, meticulously. Bishop after bishop, theologian after theologian, witness after witness, all weave together a tapestry of truth. The court sees that her original judges acted out of political pressure, fear, and spite. They see that Joan's visions were not dismissed for lack of authenticity, but for the danger they posed to the fragile structures of power. They see that the girl who heard heaven was forced into a corner where her faith became the weapon used against her. And on a warm July day, in the year 1456, the verdict arrives like a bell tolling across the centuries. Joan is declared innocent. The sentence of heresy is overturned. Her trial is denounced as corrupt. Her name is restored. It is not Joan who hears this judgment. Her ashes have long since mingled with the soil of Rouen. But France hears it. And something in the heart of the nation softens, humbled by the weight of what has been corrected too late. The decision spreads quickly through cities and villages, carried by scholars, clergy, and common folk. The stories change shape, they grow lighter, brighter. No longer is Joan the strange visionary to be questioned. She becomes the holy warrior who lived with a fire that no blade, no judge, no earthly flame could extinguish. As decades turn into centuries, her story ripples outward. Pain transforms into reverence. Her life becomes a lantern held high in the darkness, its glow guiding those who stand alone with conviction burning in their hearts. Each era finds its own reflection in her courage. Reformers, dreamers, soldiers, revolutionaries, those who challenge injustice with nothing but a voice and a calling. In time, she becomes Saint Joan of Arc, canonized in 1920, nearly 500 years after her death. The girl who once walked barefoot across fields near Domrémy rises into the ranks of the Church's most beloved saints. Pilgrims travel to places she touched, seeking not relics, but the quiet strength that lived within her. And though centuries have passed, her story remains alive, vibrant, unyielding. But canonization is not the true measure of her legacy. Her real sanctity lives in the hearts she continues to steady. In the teenager who feels too small for the calling inside them. In the person who stands before a world that doubts their purpose. In those who listen for guidance in the spaces where silence gathers. She becomes a reminder that truth does not require armor, that courage often wears the face of a young girl who refuses to bow to fear. History, in its long and winding way, understands her now, not as the prisoner of ruin, not as the suspect in chains, but as the spark that helped reshape a nation. The whisper that turned into a battle cry. The flame that outlived the fire meant to silence her, and so, through time's shifting winds, Joan endures. She endures in the memory of France, in the prayers of believers, in the stories told by those who admire the impossible made real, in the quiet courage of souls who dare to rise when the world says kneel. Her echo is not a fading sound, it is a presence, a soft glow in the long corridors of history, a testament to conviction, to faith, to the kind of bravery that does not shout but stands firm. And as her name settles into the centuries, it glows like an ember carried gently through time, guiding us to the closing reflection where her courage becomes our own quiet companion in the dark. And so, as the last embers of Joan's story fade into the hush of the night, we sit for a moment in the quiet glow she leaves behind. Her courage, her clarity, her unwavering heart, they drift through time like a soft lantern on a dark river, reminding us that even in the heaviest chapters of history, there are souls who choose light. Though centuries have passed, her echo still hums in the quiet, a gentle murmur that invites us to stand true, even when no one else can see our fire. Thank you, truly, for sharing this quiet space with me tonight, for listening, breathing, and simply being here. In this little pocket of stillness, you are part of something timeless, a lineage of dreamers, seekers, and soft-hearted wanderers who pause to listen to the stories the world has almost forgotten. Your presence matters, your rest matters, and it's an honor to guide you gently through these winding corridors of time. Now, let the weight of the day loosen its hold. Let your breath deepen like the slow settling of snow. You've traveled far, across centuries, across battles, across the tender landscape of one young woman's bravery. May your dreams carry you gently through the night, soft as candle smoke, warm as a whispered blessing. This has been the Sleeping Hourglass, where the past tucks you in and history becomes a lullaby. If tonight's story brought you peace, you're always welcome to return whenever your spirit needs a quiet place to rest. For now, sleep well beneath the hush of history's final sigh, and let the night hold you gently until morning finds you again.